Know this. Introducing the original blood clot podcast, not players. Soothing Semantics. Special dedication all the way from New York. Boom. Yeah, man. SWOT Semantics. Yeah, me know. Boom. Soothing Semantics. Yeah, me know. Big ups to the man now. Soothing Semantics.
Welcome to another episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast. I'm your host, Rafi Pinsky. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, leave your comments, whether they're good or bad. We welcome them all. Today, we have two brothers from the Cohen family. Now, for whoever doesn't know, the Cohen family is a very prominent Chabad family, and they're from Detroit, from the dangerous streets of Detroit. Gunslinging Jews from Detroit. I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. We'll go into it. So, their second to oldest brother Shua was on my podcast quite a little while ago, and we talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We met at my friend's house party. Well, actually, they were roommates at the time in Manhattan. And by the way, a funny story with this: the way I met Shua was that everyone was pretty drunk, and we were heading out to a bar, and Shua just like dropped a cup of beer on the floor. And I had no idea Shua was Yoni's roommate. And I went over to Shua and I was like, bro, pick that up. And he looks at me and he's like, huh? And I'm like, dude, who do you think you are dropping a cup? Something along those lines. I was like, bro, pick the cup. I didn't know they were friends. They knew each other. I didn't know who he was. And then he's like, oh, I'm Yoni's roommate. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, dude, you're a boy. He's like, you're a good friend, you know? And then after that, we were tight. It was very funny.
I feel like most of Shua's friend origin story starts with some sort of drunken almost fight.
Probably. Yeah. So we knew each other for quite some time, and I saw Shua on and off. He was staying in New York for a while, and I had already moved out here 3 years ago, and then I needed a roommate here, so Shua introduced me to Levi, and Levi's the older brother, the oldest of the four. You guys have any other brothers, or it's just you four?
No, we have two younger sisters, but
okay. So now I'm living with the oldest brother, and here I am interviewing the two younger brothers. So guys, well, I don't like to call it an interview. You guys are on my show. This isn't an episode of 60 minutes. So Avi and Mutzi, thank you guys for coming. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about several things, and we're going to get into one topic that's very current and very interesting is the topic of abortion. And we're going to talk about the Jewish thoughts on abortion, the Torah's thoughts on abortion. Real quick though, they have a podcast called the Jewish Thought Podcast. Did I get that right? Did I miss something?
Jewish Thought Flow.
The Jewish Thought Flow podcast. Guys, definitely check it out, especially if you're interested in religious philosophy and you like to hear the Jewish thoughts on things and why us Hebrews think what we think, what our teachings are all about. So definitely give it a gander. The Cohen family, I've noticed, is a very deep thinking family, very opinionated family. So I have no doubt that these other two brothers that I'm about to get to know a little better are very similar in their own way. What's interesting is the two older brothers have more of a traditional or secular mindset, especially Shua. And then you guys are still more Orthodox, like considerably more than the other two. So it's kind of interesting how that panned out. So we'll go into that a little bit because this is a very non-filtered podcast, man. I curse on this. I talk about whatever I talk about. So feel free to have your discussions. Whatever you don't feel comfortable with, we can leave out. But I like to make this as natural as possible. So without further ado, we'll start with you, Mati. Just kind of give me a little bit of a background, even though you guys are both family, a little bit of background on what you do now, where you're from.
All right, so I'm from Detroit. I'm from Oak Park, which is really a suburb of Detroit. I learn pretty much full time in something called a Kolo.
Yeah, and by the way, just make sure to premise everything in a kind of non-religious, like don't use any religious terminologies. No one's going to understand anything.
Okay, so it's an institution called a Kolo, which basically means somebody pays a subsidy for me to be able to sit and learn. So I study Judaic studies. I study Jewish law. And during some of my breaks, I tutor. I have gotten my master's degree on online college in education. I hope to be a teacher one day. And on the side, me and my brother started a podcast called Jewish Thought Flow, which you mentioned earlier, where we discuss different Jewish philosophy, different areas in Judaism, which people don't necessarily understand. We try to give an explanation that can be acceptable to basically anybody.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to check out some episodes so I can get a better picture. Avi, kind of go into the same thing.
So
we got Oak Park. I'm assuming Oak Park, you were born in the same house, right?
yeah, well, so we were actually all born in New Jersey, so we moved to Detroit.
Right, Levi said that.
Yeah, so I was 9 years old when we moved. We're all 2 years apart, and then we're all pretty much born in the same month. So like March, some of us go a little bit into April. So the four brothers are 2 years apart.
You're all born in March.
I mean, some of us are a little bit into April, but March and April is we're all congregated and exactly 2 years apart. So
your parents are very methodical people. You realize that your parents.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the planning was behind it, but it just worked out nicely like that. So, like, even remembering one of my brother's age is very simple because, I mean, assuming I can remember my age, then I just, either go down two to figure out Mati, or go up two or up four to figure out Shua or Levi. So
it's funny. I never thought about that. I always go up. All three of my brothers are older than me, so I'm always going up two. I go up 2, 4, and 6 to figure out my brother's ages.
Okay. But then also as kids, we used to have like one birthday party. Our parents used to just, I guess kill 4 sons with one stone.
That's what I was thinking. They're Jewish and they wanted a discount. It's much cheaper that way.
We did one big cake.
I don't know them at all, but I just see them thinking, well, why not just have 4 birthdays at the same time? We'll worry about the daughters whenever they,
Right. It was such a shock when the first daughter was born, and she's 3 years off, and then she's also in the total. She's in April.
She has the same birthday as Shua actually, but the other one is 6 months off and 3 years.
That's funny.
That kind of threw us for a loop. So we moved into Detroit when I was 9. You mentioned that 2 of my brothers are secular and 2 of us are more religious. So it's actually a little more interesting than that, is that Mati is very similar to Levi. So the youngest and oldest are very, very similar. And the 2 middle, me and Shua, are very, very similar. So our approaches to religion are identical, but like mirror opposites. So I'm, without getting it, like, I guess, and I don't know what Mati wants me to share, but me and Shua, I guess, are very, very intellectual. We like, Mati's gotten more over the years, obviously, but
I'm forced into it. Naturally, I don't really like thinking.
Right. So me and Shua love research and love reading papers and on different things. And obviously me for the religious side and him for the anti-religious side. But Mati and Levi are much more like, if you would walk in on us on a random day without any outside influence, I would be sitting studying something, and Shua would be studying something, and Levi and Mati would be playing video games together.
I totally agree with that. They kind of, because that's how Levi is. But it's funny is that Levi still has a solid knowledge. If you pick his brain, he'll bring it up sometimes because I know a lot about it. For instance, with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we'll be on the balcony. I'll come home or he'll come home and we'll just start talking about it. And he knows a lot of things, but day to day, he'll be involved in whatever he's involved in. So it's very interesting. Well, Shua, anytime I meet up with Shua, we just get into this crazy philosophy conversation, which I enjoyed either way, man. I can do small talk. I definitely do it, but I enjoy deep discussion much, much more than, So
I think with any one of us, there could be a deep discussion, but I think the resting state is different.
Right.
Meaning, I think me and Shua, our natural interests are intellectual pursuits, as opposed to, Mati and Levi, while they're both as intelligent as any one of us, I wouldn't say their natural interest is.
So it's a good thing you disclaimed that, because I thought what you were essentially saying is you guys were smarter than them.
Well, yeah,
it's one of the rare cases where the people who are not intellectual, in the intellectual pursuit, are actually more intelligent than the ones who are.
Yes,
it's not so common.
Yes, I love that. That was so good. Bam, right in the face. Okay, that was good.
So we actually.
By the way, hold on. That was so something Levi would say. It's so something Levi would say.
Yeah, if you want to know what Mati is religiously, you just look at what Levi is in a secular sense, and then you just You just can you just like infer the opposite.
So
and
funny
it's
how that works. And you guys also look a lot more similar.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I love that. That's a big eye opener for me. I've never really seen four brothers and then seen that there's, in a sense, two twins or two couples of each. It's just very fascinating.
Well, it's also, I think the two middle ones and the two outside ones and they also look much more similar. Yeah, like you said. But.
They look a lot more similar. That's funny. Okay.
I was gonna say, as like a family, we're all really, really close, and we get into like huge arguments. Since we were like super young, we would get into huge, pretty much fights with each other. But we've always stayed incredibly close, and like all four of us, we have a wide range of positions on pretty much everything. Mm-hmm. But through all that, we're able to stay very close, and I think that kind of is why we're able to morph into kind of two camps, where even though we're on opposite sides, and I'm much closer to. I wouldn't say I'm closer to Avi than my other brothers, but I definitely like speak to him more because we're more similar minded, being both religious.
Right.
So, we talk a lot more than I talk to my other brothers, but, with that being said, we're all incredibly close.
Okay. I figured as much, and it's really good that you guys are. The benefit of having you guys on opposite ends is that you're all very well spoken. That's one thing I notice. Very articulate. And the fact that two of the brothers are not really religious, they're not religious, and then the other two are, it allows you to really learn from each other, as opposed to having all four religious or all four secular, where you all have the same thought process. You guys can really learn from each other and have these outside perspectives.
Yeah,
so it's good.
I think that's always nicely into like where the origin of our podcast came. So around 10th grade, I think for all four of us, we started dipping from the religious path. And that was across the board. So I would say around 10th grade is like 16 years old. So around 16, I think the universal common denominator is we all got involved with girls. Mm-hmm. So for those that you don't know, in strictly religious homes, boys and girls are kept separate till marriage. So for the average religious person, or let's say a little more right-wing religious person, he won't. The first girl he'll speak to is a family member or in a dating for marriage format. Obviously, I mean, if you ask on the street and ask for directions, I mean, there's those interactions, but the first formal or even casual conversation you're going to have with a girl, or girls going to have with a boy, is either going to be a family member or for the sake of getting married. But what is also common is that being as, it's a big desire, especially amongst teenagers, and it probably continues all the way through young adult and mid adult, but the pursuit of sexual relations is a great desire and pull, and therefore around 16, when those things kind of hit their climax in a teenager, that's when we sort of started rebelling a little against that format of that paradigm. And I think it was all in 10th grade, we like spoke to our first girl. And that sort of set us in like this sort of motion where we were starting to drift from, because again, that's your first step out, and it's a pull because it's hard to reconcile, what you're supposed to be doing with what you are doing. And then that's going to pull at you. And depending on how far you let it pull at you, that's where the fabric of your religious upbringing starts kind of disintegrating. So that happened to all of us in 10th grade. And then from there, I got pretty bad in terms of my religious side. So all the way till I would say about 18, 19, I was headed less religious. So during that period, as Mati said, that me and him are now, let's say, closer, not, and again, I want to just make sure that it's not closer as in I love him more, but just we have more in common, so we speak more, is that during that time period, I was actually incredibly close with Shua, because all of our pursuits aligned. We were both really into working out. We would speak about girls, we would speak about politics and all that sort of stuff. And we were both less religious at that point. So this kind of trend continued till I was about 19. I went to yeshiva in Israel, which is a place where Jewish people, religious people go to study. So we went to Israel to yeshiva, and there I sort of refound my, religious upbringing, and sort of left behind all the aspects, secular aspects of my life. And at that point, we then started to have conversations with Shua, who had, let's say, continued on the secular path and became more secular up until this point. And that's when like the real, let's say, tenuous or opposing view conversations started coming out in regards to religion. And that really formulated my rational relationship to religion, because I had to defend it against somebody who was, like I said, he's my mirror opposite. So who was equally rational and equally a pursuant of knowledge and information, and was fighting on the other end. So that's when that battle started. And when I was armed with all of that, and I emerged from it, let's say, unscathed on my end, so that's when the origin of the podcast was like, God put me on this journey. I have these skills that I wouldn't have had in a normal journey, because what you're speaking about, the fact that we're different, but it's also on a personal level. I had those questions myself. So when I was able to reformulate it, I thought it was my obligation I now have to share this with other people who might be going through a similar journey.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. I'm just trying to imagine both of you having a debate about religion, because Shu is so much more on the other end. He's more on the other end than I am, because I don't have any I wouldn't say animosity. I don't think he has animosity, but maybe he does. But I don't have any objections to it. For me, it's more of, first off, I enjoy my lifestyle more. And B, I just need to have more proof in things. So, and I know obviously that can lead you into kind of like, and I know you're not looking to do that, but like a Kirov talk of, hey, here's what it is. Here's what you should do. Or not here's what you should do, but here's why I do what I do. So I didn't really want to get too much into necessarily why be Jewish or why be religious. I did want to talk about more of current events, and we can go into it if you guys would really like to. I don't mind. I know I'm the host, but I'd like to leave things open. So in terms of abortion, let's go straight to the bread and butter, to the exciting part. Lately, Roe versus Wade determined that states decide independently whether abortions are allowed or not, whether they're illegal or not. So I honestly have no idea. I know some of the states don't allow it, and those are generally the heavily conservative states, the ones in the middle, Wyoming and Nebraska and whichever others, I forget which ones. In terms of the Torah's view, so for whoever doesn't know what the Torah is the Old Testament. What does the Old Testament say about abortion?
In Jewish law, there's a difference between a Jew getting an abortion and a non-Jew getting an abortion. So if you want to talk about the Bible itself, so the Bible itself, the Torah, Chumash, it doesn't talk about abortion anywhere. There's obviously a law against murder, and the question would be, does abortion fall under that? But that's not discussed. And then there is one set of psukim, set of verses which talk about if two men are getting into a fight and they accidentally hit a pregnant woman, and it kills the fetus. So the verse tells us that you have to pay to the father of that fetus. You have to pay a certain amount of value, which gets determined by the court. So that's really all the Chumash, all the Bible talks about abortion. In the oral tradition of Jewish law, it tells us that for a non-Jew, I'm just going to simplify it, after 40 days after conception, from that point on, it's considered murder to abort a fetus. So that's for a non-Jew to do that action would be considered murder after 40 days.
Okay. So I remember when Avi and his wife came to visit for a few minutes, obviously the question everyone wants to know is, why is it murder for a non-Jew after 40 days, and why for a Jew is it not?
So, well, it's not necessarily not murder for a Jew after 40 days. Well, let me tell you what it is for a Jew first, and then we can discuss what the difference are, and why the differences are. So for a Jew, it's a lot more complicated. I'm not going to take you through all the technical mumbo jumbo, but I'll just get you to the bottom line. There's an argument among the modern day rabbinic scholars, Orthodox scholars, whether or not it's considered murder for a Jew. That's before 40 days or after 40 days. So there's a famous posek, what's the English word for posek?
Codifier of Jewish law.
That's not a
decider.
Yeah, I guess it's because it's not a judge; it's more of a decision maker, so to speak. I don't know. I don't have a word for it. Is there an?
Okay, it's probably authority of Jewish law, rabbinic authority on Jewish
rabbinic
law.
authority.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay.
So his name is Rav Moshe Feinstein. So he is the most stringent on this area, and he says that it's considered murder for a Jew even before 40 days, pretty much from conception. That would be the most stringent view. But the range goes all the way until there's a commentary called the Tzitz Eliezer, who's also a posek, a decider of Jewish law. And he says that it's not considered murder even after 40 days. It's not considered murder ever. There's a different issue with it, but there's a few different possible issues. One of them is
considered murder ever.
It's never considered, well, I mean, after the baby's born, obviously, but up till the baby's out of the womb or out of the birthing channel, it's not considered murder ever.
I mean, up till childbirth.
Up till birth, it's not considered murder. But that doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with it. There is something wrong with it, and the only time.
Oh, you know what's so funny, guys? Real quick, I literally just got a notification just now. New episode of Jewish Thought Flow: Abortion and Halacha. That's funny.
There you go.
Right? Yeah, the timing, man. That's great. So for whoever doesn't know, halacha with a ch, it means Jewish law. That's what it means. Abortion, Jewish law. That's funny, man. Life is weird. Okay.
Yes, I recorded that just before this episode. So he holds it's never murder. The problems would be either damaging to the woman's body, which is also forbidden under Jewish law to damage oneself, except under certain circumstances, which is why he allows abortion under certain circumstances, which I'll get to in a second. And the other problem would be wasting.
I just cut in for a second. That's just an interesting point that it's sort of the abortion debate in America is set up on like two sides. It's the woman's body, the woman's choice, versus it's another life. It has its own rights. Entire law has another side, which is it could be your body, but you're not the owner of your body. You were given a body for a reason. And you're not allowed to just do whatever you want with your body. There's Jewish law about damaging oneself. You're not allowed to just decide, hey, I want to chop off a limb. Hey, I want to mutilate my ear or mutilate my nose or anything. You're not allowed to do that.
Or mutilate other things that people are mutilating in this day and age.
Right. So you're not allowed to do that because God gave us a body and he gave us a specific body. I know there's the idea that we can be put in the wrong body, but the question is always begged, who put you in that wrong body? So if you hold somebody could put you in a body, I assume he knew what he was doing when he put you in that body. So we don't hold that you can just pick what I want to do with my body. Our bodies are here for a purpose. They're given on loan, so to speak, for us to do a certain mission in this world. And one of the Jewish laws is you're not allowed to just damage yourself. So abortion could be, even if it is just the woman's body, that's not like, okay, if it's your body, your choice. My body, my choice is not a thing in Jewish law. It's God's body, God's rules. It's probably more the accurate phrase.
Right. So that's definitely something very contradictory to your average secular liberal person where they say, well, what do you tell me? How can you tell me what to do? God this, God schmad, it's my body, it's my choice. I can hear both sides. I do, although, think that if you are deciding to have premarital sex and you have a child, there are consequences. At the same time, if a kid, no one, only the Jews will understand that. If a woman was, God forbid, raped, supposedly the word on YouTube, it's better for the algorithm to like use a different word. So if a woman had a child against her will, then in that case, I think it would be understandable. There's also the concept that the idea that people say, okay, well, if the kid is born in a very poor environment or born to parents who can't take care of them, then it may be better to not have the kid. But it's like, who has the right to say that? And I was born to a mother who couldn't take care of me. My grandmother thankfully raised me, and I think I turned out pretty well. So I'm very grateful that I wasn't aborted. That wasn't the plan anyway. My mother had no intention of doing that, but if I grew up with her, it would have been a pretty bad situation. So when I think of abortion, I think of myself, and it's like, well, if my mom decided to abort me, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
It's funny. You used a phrase. You said, "Who gives somebody the right to choose that?"
In what sense?
Right. You said who gives somebody the right to choose? Let's say the financial situation is such that.
Oh, right, 100%.
So, who has to give anybody a right to do anything?
Well, is this a rhetorical question, or are you actually asking me?
Well, I'm actually asking. Well, from my perspective, I can give my perspective. I mean, from a Jewish religious perspective, the person who gives the right to do anything is God. I'm asking from a from a, let's say, from a non-religious perspective.
Well,
So
from a
it seems to be people kind of assume that people have certain rights. Even in American law, we have rights that are built in. But the law seems to be reflecting some sort of right that the person has intrinsically.
I think, I think the person to a degree should have a right. The problem is that, and I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't had premarital sex, because that's not the case. However, when you decide to do something, anything you do, there are consequences, anything, and we can go into this. So for instance, we could talk about premarital sex also in Judaism and all these things. But in terms of having sex, if you're not careful, there's always a risk of pregnancy. So the benefit of, say, being a religious Jew, growing up religious, waiting until marriage, there's a huge plus of not having to worry about pregnancy, therefore not having to worry about abortion, and not having to worry about STDs. There's a lot of things that you avoid by following those Jewish laws, or any of the three monotheistic religions for that matter. You lessen the chances of those things happening by almost 100%. Of course, can a girl end up being pregnant because she was forced to have sex? It's possible, but the percentage of abortions that happen from rape are slim to none, according to statistics. It's almost
bad if somebody is looking for an intelligent discussion on grapes and
grapes. Yeah. No, but it's almost always because the woman chose to have sex with a guy. The guy was not the right guy, or the guy decided to run away or do whatever, wasn't involved in the child's life or the woman's life for that matter. And now she's stuck with a kid, and the decision she made is putting her in a position she can never get out of. And so some women want to have their cake and eat it too. And of course the guy should be held accountable, but it's a little bit easier for the guy. The guy can kind of just run away. As much as I think the woman should have a say to a degree, I think also, as long as the man is looking to stay in the picture, I think he should have a say as well. Even if it's not the baby that's in her, even though he's not the one carrying the baby, he still chose to have the baby.
Yes,
So
that's another aspect of
yeah.
Jewish law, which I think differs strongly, is that the baby's viewed as the property of the father, such that if the woman wants to get an abortion, she has to ask the husband's permission before doing so.
So non-religious people would hate that you're saying that, and I hear you. I totally hear it, because it's a more old view of man's permission. I don't need a man to tell me what to do with my body. It's like, well, you kind of allowed him inside you, and now you want nothing to do with his opinion. But you kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think,
and you also wanted to pay child support somehow.
That's also true, right? They want him to pay child support, and oftentimes the child support far outweighs, meaning a lot of the guys don't necessarily have the money for it or pay it, but the child support oftentimes is going towards her lifestyle as well, not just the kid. So,
if I could just hit at this topic a little bit. So there's a lot of considerations in any decision, right? So, I mean, you're mentioning a couple of them, right? So the woman's going to feel very uncomfortable. She might have made a mistake. It might actually have been a scenario that wasn't really her decision. It might be one of those, 1 in a million grape cases that you like to speak about. There's always a moral flip side to the question. So there's always motivation for a decision. But on the flip side, there should be a question of, is it okay? Is this motivation sufficient to allow me to do this? For example, if I have a kid who's 5 years old and I find out that they're special needs. Okay, sometimes it takes late to develop, and you figure out a little later, hey, this kid has special needs. And I'm like, whoa, I did not sign up for this. I didn't want this. Now I'm going to have to take care of this kid till he's, an adult, because there's nowhere I can just drop him off, and it's going to be very uncomfortable. I want to just end his life, right? So we have all the same factors, right? We have the variables in place. There's motivation to do it. It's very uncomfortable. I'm not really going to it's going to be very hard for me to have an emotional connection with the kid, because he can't, he has special needs. So there's a limitation of how giving back he's going to be, how much interaction there's going to be. But nobody in their right mind, I think today, or maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, somebody in their right mind would have said, it's okay to get rid of the kid. But I think today would be like, well, that's horrible. You can't just kill a 5-year-old just because he's special needs. So that's the moral flip side of the question, is we have the motivation, but does that make it right to do? So with the abortion conversation, everybody's speaking motivations, right? They're going like, well, I have this motivation, that motivation, that motivation. Yeah, but there's one question we're not answering, which is the most important question of all. What is the formula that allows said motivation to equal said act. Because where am I getting that you can't do the special, you can't kill a special needs kid? Where did I get that formula from? I didn't get it from anywhere, because if you spoke to people in Nazi Germany, I think they would have been far more down with going, yeah, that's eugenics. That's very good, because we get rid of them. They're out of the gene pool and it's better for humanity. And that's not like, it wasn't even a cruel thing. That was literally how they thought was correct. They thought, yeah, you're being cruel to leave them in the world. Today we'd be like, no, that's terribly cruel to get rid of them. But abortion, we're like, it's terribly cruel to the woman. How are we going about with these formulas to figure out what is correct and what is not correct? There's no scientific approach to it, because there's no science behind should or shouldn't do. There's no, it's not a chemical question. It's not even a biological question. The question is, how do you value this life versus this motivation? And everybody's just talking, but nobody's actually putting forth a formula that allows us to make these decisions.
It's funny how vaccines, so this is always, maybe you guys heard this, with vaccines, a lot of people who are very pro-choice have this feeling of go get your vaccine, you need it, otherwise you're selfish. So they push the vaccines, but then they want to have freedom of choice when it comes to children, which I find very interesting how that works. They should be very pro-choice in that as well. I find that very interesting. And their thing is they're pushing vaccines because it supposedly saves lives. So the irony of that is pretty interesting to me.
Well, they were also pushing my wife was actually pregnant during COVID, and they were pushing vaccines because for the life of the fetus, that if the mother catches COVID, it could be very dangerous to the fetus. And the same organizations that are behind the push for legalizing abortion were the same organizations who are behind the push for vaccinations for pregnant women to protect the fetus. So, but I think that's just another good example of where these are moral questions. And moral questions anything can fly, and they can be contradictory. It could be the same mantra. It could be a different mantra. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever people think is okay. That becomes the feeling of, oh, I'm being a moral person. Everybody in Nazi Germany, I can't say everybody, but I would guarantee you, if you went to Nazi Germany and took a poll, do you think what we're doing to the Jewish people, or what we're doing to the gypsies, what we're doing to special needs, do you think this is good and okay and morally fine? I guarantee you would have a majority respondent going, yeah, and they would just list the reasons. Well, the Jews are, they're really into money, and they're a cancer in the society, and special needs people are just ruining the gene pool, and gypsies are just, stealing from us, whatever the rationale is. And then it would just end in the most atrocious actions. So I feel like right now, because we're not actually addressing the abortion question of, is it murder or not? We're literally in that same milieu of, we're giving the motivations, which are fine, but we're not checking it. Well, is it murder? Because if it is, then there's no difference between you and any other point in history where we, excuse murder.
I would think most people would acknowledge that it is murder, even if it's at the child in the womb past. I forget where the trimesters are and at what stage the second, third, fourth trimester is. I would have to look it up. The idea that after a certain period, the doctor has to remove limbs. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah.
They literally have to take the baby apart and pull it out. That should concern people, So it's tough for me to really put my stance on this. For me, my ultimate feeling is, I think it depends on the time period, what stage the child is in, and what the circumstances. At the end of the day, though, I think that for the most part, after the child even is inside the womb, there's a certain stage where it's still alive. And if it's alive, it has the potential for life. It can grow into a perfectly healthy human, and that human can do incredible things in the world. And you're removing that person that it could have potentially been somebody. So it's a very tough conversation, man. It's a very, very complex conversation. I just really want to hear I just wanted to hear your perspectives.
If I could take a slightly contrarian, from a non-religious perspective, like, I know what my religious perspective is, but that's not based on my own opinion. That's based on what I understand the law to be in Judaism. If I didn't have that law telling me what to do, and I didn't have religion, then I'd be fully pro-choice, but not because I'm pro-choice any more than pro-life. You were talking about how, let's say once it has limbs and you're pulling out limbs from limbs, so that kind of looks like a human. And that kind of, like, my gut is kind of telling me also that once it has limbs, once it looks like a human, that could be considered a human. Some people's gut tells them once it's viable, that could be considered human. Some people's gut tell them once it's past conception, that's considered a human. So if you base your opinion on what your gut's telling you, so then there's no way of, there's no common ground to have a conversation even, because your gut's telling you limbs, my gut's telling me conception or viability or 2 years old.
It's a very good point.
But even if my gut was telling me 5 years old is the limit, there's also no way you could kind of talk to me about that.
I think that's kind of crazy. I think that's kind of nuts. But I hear what you're saying. But I think once the child is born, anyone will agree, if they have half a brain, that the child is very much alive.
But everyone will agree, and I agree with that. And I think most people agree right now.
Yeah, and it's not independent. It can't live on its own, but it's still very much living.
But as Avi mentioned, everyone will agree right now that if a 5-year-old with special needs, you also shouldn't kill it.
Oh, definitely not.
But 70 years ago, people would have held that was good. And if in 20 years from now, people do hold that. So if you're basing on your gut, which is what I believe anybody without religion is just based on their gut, because there is nothing to go on outside of your gut if you don't have religion. So I don't feel like any moral conversation could even be had, which is another way of saying without religion, there can be no morality, because there could be no right and wrong. There could just be gut feelings. So my gut could be telling me this today, and my gut could be switch around in 20 years from now.
Or it could be switched around by somebody who's charismatic and convincing, and even if we're coming at it from a sort of, let's say, objective manner, we hold that we have the one true religion on earth. So I would say that every other religion is a con. That means there was one person who convinced many people that to feel that what he's saying is morally correct and act in any sort of manner based on that. Now, people think like that's a religious thing. The religion can get you to act in any manner with no constraint. No, any ideology can get you to act with any manner without constraint, because like I said, there is no formula for morality. There's no hard line. If we're Nazi Germany, we hold one thing. I always give the example let's say you had a kid, let's say you had a son who was a teenager, and every time he went out drinking, somebody insulted him and he would shoot him. Right. So I think, the first time
those days, Shua's days are over. Those are long
right. They took him off the street. But let's say that would happen. So you would tell your kid, hey, first of all, you're not touching alcohol again. Second of all, you're looking at a very, very long prison sentence. And third of all, you're a pretty terrible human being. Somebody just called you, a coward, and you shot him in the head. That's not okay. Right. But there was a time in American history where insults was grounds for a duel. And if you wouldn't go try to shoot that person, you would be considered dishonorable. So in that milieu, the moral and honorable and good thing to do was to go shoot somebody. I mean, you would give him a shot, but if I'm better than him, he's going to die in this duel. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't wrong. That was perfectly honorable. So you had a society where, with the same exact formulas we're dealing with, right? That gut feel, what's okay, what's not okay. They had a world where you insult me. Yeah, we're going to shoot for we're going to shoot for death. And who says that's wrong? Maybe honor is the most important thing in the world. Where did we get that it's not? So that's why I think the problem of these switching morality businesses is that there's no end. Everybody thinks like, no, that's crazy. What you said, like 5-year-old's crazy, because it is crazy to us, but it's not crazy to a different generation.
I love these conversations, dude. They get your brain to just, it's amazing, because then my brain starts going off in different directions. Modern society, feminism, modern dating versus traditional dating. Is it better if women work more? Is it better if they work less? And that's a whole separate conversation we can have on at another time, because it'll take so long to get through that.
Right.
It is very interesting, man. What some countries consider moral, other countries consider to be terrible things. I mean, that's human nature, man. We're intelligent animals. So it's wild to go from country to country, religion to religion, person to person, and see the differences in what people consider to be good versus evil.
What I think is most fascinating is how sure they are.
Right.
It's not just certain. They have. It's like, what do you mean? You can't kill a special needs person? What do you mean? That's where it gets scary, because I've had conversations with people, and they're like, and they're asking on my religious beliefs, like, how can you possibly hold such a thing that's so immoral? I was like, you in any other era have so drastically different views than the ones you're espousing today. Where are you getting this? Like, what do you mean? Of course, this is correct.
And that's one of my favorite parts about being a religious Jew is that you can't say the same thing about me and my brother. If we were in any other era for the past 2,000 years, we'd hold the same values. And Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, religious Judaism is held of the same values, since the values were given over at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai from God. Until today, we hold to the same values, and that hasn't changed, and that will never change. But every other, forget religion, but let's say every other, society where they base their actions based on, guts or what they feel like is a developed sense of morality, well, that changes every 20 years. And as Avi said, the certainty that they have in the current, this is the morality. So it just to give
So
like a
well
kind of
put.
wild example.
You're putting this so well. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned like feminism, but it's gotten beyond feminism at this point. Now, transgenderism is an area. So I mentioned this in the podcast, and not to get political, but 20 years ago, if a guy said he felt like a girl, it just the reality, he would have been, locked up in a mental home, or he would have been said he was crazy. Now, if somebody says that, and somebody says, I think you're making a mistake, now that guy is going to be locked up because he's being immoral. Now, that shift happened in about 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Before I want to visit with you, Ms. Pinsky, but before I do, I just want to clear one thing up. Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this? Where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Quite frankly, I think it's absolutely nuts to me. I'm just going to put this out there just so you guys have I'm sure you guys know exactly where I stand on this, but
just say grapes.
Grape. Well, no, it's transgender at the end of the day, man. Listen, if they want to be, they can be. I think it's a mental disorder. If he wants to be called a she, congratulations. If you were born Jason and you want to be called Samantha, by all means, I'll call you that if it makes you happy. Do I think it's normal? No. There are 2 genders, point blank, period. Woman's a woman, the man's a man. You want to be a man, you want to be a woman, makes you happy, no problem. In terms of morality, I don't know if I would call it immoral. I would call it more delusional. I just think it's something where the person they need help. And it doesn't mean they don't deserve my respect. It just means that I clearly have a view where the person's not mentally stable and mentally happy. Very hard for me to see it otherwise. And but I think those people are always going to exist. I think they've probably been around since the beginning of time. And I don't think they should be murdered for it like they have been, they have been in the past. And I don't think they should be locked up for it. I think they should be able to live their lives, but I don't think that it should be something that's seen as completely normal either. So it's a very complicated conversation. But for me, I'm very neutral about it in terms of it just doesn't affect my life enough. If they want to do it, they can go ahead. No, well, not yet. God forbid I don't have a kid that has that situation, but I'd still love my kid if they did. I would try my best to help them come to reality, but I would still love my kid. But
how happy would you be if your kid wasn't delusional, but got sent to school where they're convinced that feeling uncomfortable in their body meant they were delusional?
Well, somebody's sending that kid to school and that person's me. So he's not going to that. He or she's not going to that school.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's well. My kids are going to yeshiva, and yeshiva.
Yes, you're sending to yeshiva. I was going to say.
Yeah, so we don't have that problem. At least not. There might be some yeshivas that promote it, and I don't think those schools should be open. But
But that point right there is so fascinating, because let's say, and I think there's decent evidence behind this, that the more normal it becomes, and not only normal, but the more acceptable it becomes, the more people who have unrelated issues or even are looking for attention can take on it. And people convince themselves of a lot of things and can acquire unhealthy states of mind. So let's say there was decent evidence that the more normal and acceptable transgenderism became, the more people started identifying, which I think there is the decent evidence to that. So now here, I have a question. I have a person who's naturally has the, gender dysphoria, right? The one in whatever the clinical, whatever the ratio of people who are actually clinically identified as having gender dysphoria. I think it's like 1 in 100,000 or something. It's very, very low. So let's say I have that person, and I don't have anything against him. He has a problem like anybody else. Some people think they're animals. Some people think they're radios. This person thinks there's no difference. They think somebody put them in the wrong body.
It's the exact same thing.
What does that mean?
Me right now thinking, I want to be very clear to anyone who's listening to this. If I think I'm a woman, it is no different from thinking I am a zebra. It is exactly the same. There's no difference at all in terms of logic.
They both equally do not comport with biological reality. And no, it's a funny thing. Like I was put in the wrong body. This is coming from people who are secular. Who first of all, who are you outside of your body? Second of all, who do you think is responsible for putting people in their body? You're like an angel of souls or something,
right? They pretty much admit that they're religious without admitting.
Right. It's like, this is like a very deep Kabbalistic sort of religion. Like, it's female souls and male souls. You can be put in the wrong body for some sort of, a reincarnation. But anyway, so let's say you thought that now my kid, if I don't stem this, nip this in the bud, no pun intended, if you can find one, then this is a cancer that could spread and normal people can be harmed. Let's say that number goes from 1 in 100,000 to the amount of Generation Z kids who identify as transgenders, I think closer to what is it? I think it's probably like 1 in 50 by now. Those are ridiculous. Whatever the number is, it's a ridiculous difference to the actual number. So those are kids who have problems. Those are kids who might, under government funding, have access to, as a child, have access to transgender surgery.
You know why this is happening? You know why this is happening on a simple level, in my very strong opinion?
Okay.
Is simply because as a society, in many respects, America is getting softer and weaker, and especially through this recession, but people are very, very soft. You know how the cycle goes. They where I'm going with this. Strong people create good times create weak people create hard times, and the cycle continues. We are now in that soft person, hard times situation. And when that happens, because we have so many luxuries as Americans, you end up becoming soft, complacent, lazy, ignorant, and we have to find things to worry about. We don't live in a country where there's civil unrest, people living in tents. Well, there are homeless people in California, but for the most part, most people live quite well here. Even the poorer people, they have luxuries that in some other countries it'd be considered only the wealthy would have such a thing. So because Americans have things so easy, people have to naturally find something to complain about. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Is I think to a large degree, transgenderism on a deeper level, I think is a human being's inability to cope with reality and persevere through challenge. And I think it's easier for them if maybe they were bullied in school as a guy, or they looked more feminine, they didn't have facial hair, they were smaller bodied, and people called them, and it sounds very, obviously to anyone transgender listening to this, or anyone that's very pro-transgender, they'll be like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're totally ignorant. But this is just my perception of it. I feel that, and of course you may have, I saw this documentary where there was an MMA fighter who was a cross-dresser. So yeah, you have your exceptions, or weird exceptions. But for the most part, there's usually a very readable understanding as to why most people, change gender, so to speak. And I think it's much less common in countries where hardship is more prominent, where fighting for your survival is more prominent. I'm sure even in the days of Vikings, there might have been some people who wanted to, look like women or look like men or dress like the other gender. For the most part, when things are difficult, you go to Russia. Do you have some transgender in Russia? Yeah, you probably have a few. Do you have a lot of them? Probably not, because it's a culture where men are men and women are women.
Yeah, Matt Walsh just put out his documentary, "What Is a Woman?"
I love that, dude. Oh my God.
So the scene where he interviewed the African tribe and their incredulous reaction to his questions about transgenderism kind of tells you everything you need to know. But I was just listening to a podcast and they were talking about.
I didn't see this. They just kind of freaked out. They're
just like they just burst out like they thought he was joking.
Yeah,
like they're like, a man thinks he's a woman. They're like, no, that doesn't happen around here.
Which is not. People tell you naturally and genetically, this is a very common thing that people have been dealing with, throughout history, but somehow in different cultures, they have no idea what we're talking about when we say these things.
I do think there's an inclination. I think there are all these things. There's always been gay people. There's always been lesbian people. This isn't some new age concept. The difference is that now it's much more widely accepted. I do think gay and lesbian is very different, though. I still think it's some level of a disorder, but I also believe, even though I'm not particularly religious, I do believe that God put people with these mindsets and challenges in the world for a reason. And that's why I respect them, because at the end of the day, they're human. But I also acknowledge that it's not a normal thing, because at the end of the day, men and women are put on this earth for a reason, right? We're meant to procreate. We're meant to continue our lineage. And a human that is incapable of that, to a large degree, isn't really serving their life's purpose. Now, obviously, people listening to this might freak out, and they can if they want to. If you don't want to have kids, go ahead and don't have kids. But if most of the world shared your sentiment, we would have no humans left. We would, and we're already, I think, human population is going to start to decline tremendously, because it's more and more prevalent where marriages are happening much later, or if at all. The birth rates have dropped significantly. So the more that transgenderism becomes a thing, we're going to see less and less humans, so this is just, we're going, in certain respects, we're going forward in many ways as a race. We're also going backwards in certain respects, I think.
So we could just tie this back into what we were talking about a little bit. I think, because I'm not like, can we get back to it? I think this actually ties in perfectly, because you said that God made certain people that way, which I agree with. No, but yeah, I remember even like as a young kid, we used to go to like amusement parks, and this is when it was less prevalent. But you would see like gay or lesbian couples, and I think now, like in media, they're portrayed very differently. And it could be it's gotten different because it's become more prevalent. But when I was a kid, when I would see them, it would usually be people who are overweight, people who you couldn't necessarily tell their gender with to start, prior to the surgery. They usually had colored hair, and the girls like cut their hair very short, and they were just overall not, let's say, stereotypically attractive, which is nothing wrong with. But it's like, well, if I had to draw a rational line between people deciding not to pursue normative sexual relations, and I'm seeing a sort of correlation. I'm no scientist, but I was a kid at this time. I was already making this correlation. I was like in my early teens. I think it was 11 or 12. And I was like, well, I'm seeing some sort of correlation between people who, let's say, would not be successful in an open market, in a sexual market.
Exactly where you're going. And I thought the same thing. So I'm saying, so
I think that it's a natural reaction. And this is where it feeds into. I could either look at myself and go, hey, you're not that attractive, and it's fine. There's other things in life, and you'll find your person. But look, you're not the A type in attraction. But that's something you have to look in the mirror and go and tell yourself, hey, you're not the best at something. Or I can go, no, I am the best. I'm the best asexual, non-binary creature, because this is what we look like. So I think it's the same thing with morality, is that if I don't have a moral code, so I can say, if I have a moral code, I have to look in the mirror and go, hey, you know what you did today? What you did was not okay. You followed a desire, which wasn't okay. Or I can say, hey, you know what's better? You follow a desire, but there's no such thing as okay or not okay. Because whatever you do is the okay. There's no judgment. Whatever you turn out that's the best way possible. So and this goes with the weak, the good times equal weak people, is that when you're not used to challenge, moral challenges are some of the greatest challenges people face. Having to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and night and go, hey, I'm not the way I should be. Well, that requires having a way you should be. And I think the greatest motivation to take away a way you should be is so you don't have to look in the mirror and go, I'm not the way I should be.
This is great. This is fantastic. It's very Jordan Peterson. It's you, but it's you. I'm not trying to, let's not give him the credit. It was my
Avi Cohen name in high school. Avi Jordan Peterson Cohen. So
yeah, it should be. It's good. But I love what you said about how people are not willing to take account. And we see this with the fat movement, with the fat, not fat shaming, the opposite, the fat, help me out here.
Fat positivity.
Right.
Image positivity.
Positivity. It's fucking ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's like if you are a woman who's very unattractive physically, and what that means is that you know when you're physically unattractive, you don't get much attention from anyone. You're ignored a lot of the time. Thank God all of us are good-looking guys, so we're lucky in that regard. But especially being
guys,
that's true. Mutzi, you got to grow that beard back.
Working on it right now.
I actually had my beard was I trimmed it and I did a bad job. I gotta let the barber do his job, man. I get so anyway, when you're a woman who is universally unattractive, and people know what that feels like when if you're a woman that just doesn't get attention day to day from men that she would like to get attention from, there's usually a lot that person can do to fix that. So if they don't have the money for it, over the course of time, losing the weight will help tremendously. You can, wear clothes that make you look good. And I don't necessarily mean provocative clothing, but clothing that fit you nicely. You can smell good, take care of your teeth, take care of your, any excess hair anywhere. There's a lot that a human can do to make themselves look very, very solid, even if they don't necessarily have the best features. And now in 2022, and this has been around for ages, plastic surgery can do wonders for you if you don't go overboard. If you have a bad nose, you can get a nose job. There's a lot you can do to make you more attractive. So I think on a deeper level, though, I think a lot of people who do become transgender have a very tough bout with their depression and their anxiety. And I think largely that comes from the inability to really fight challenges head on. And it's, people will say, well, it's easy for you to say because you're tough mentally. It's like, then that we go into the whole argument of depression and anxiety, where a buddy of mine that I know, he told me all about his depression. And for me, man, I feel that we were put on this earth in a way where the more hardship you can endure, the happier you'll be as a person, the more capable you will be as a person, the more life will be easier. That's the paradox of life is the more you seek comfort, the harder life becomes. The more you seek discomfort, the easier life becomes. And the more that people like this, it seems to be that there's a strong correlation between not accepting yourself and trying to be someone else when that yourself, so to speak, is nowhere near the person you wish you were. So if you don't feel you're an attractive woman, well, if I become a man, everything's fine. It's not a viable solution. Although some of them claim they're very happy. I have a hard time believing it. I don't know. From what I've read, studies that most people that are transgender are on heavy medication, and as far as I know, their conditions don't really go away suddenly.
Right. Well, that might be changing now that people are transitioning without actually having any underlying problem. I was just listening that it used to be transgenders were generally men to female, man to woman trans, but recently it's been shifting the other way, and part of the reason is that. Yeah, and part of the reason is that people are being told that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, it might be because you're in the wrong body. So, women going through puberty, that's something that they feel is uncomfortable in their body. So at that stage, you're like, oh, I feel uncomfortable. Like I don't know what's going on with my body. I'm probably a boy. So a lot more girls who are like at a very young age are starting to think that they're a boy. So those people don't have any actual problems with them. They're just being taught the wrong thing. So it's very likely that the rates of actual depression and suicide will go down from what it originally was, which was because those people had like serious mental problems. I'm sure it'll still be higher than your average population because these people are being convinced to do things to their body and act in ways that is not, true to themselves. So there will be higher rates of depression, but I imagine it'll go down from what it originally was when it was like a serious mental issue causing the transitioning.
Okay. I agree with that. That makes sense.
I mean, sorry, with the big is beautiful movement, I think that's what they call it. When I first started seeing it, so I thought, this is actually might be, society might be taking a positive step that, we do sort of value people by their level of attraction. And I think that there's much more valuable aspects to humanity than their external, the way they look. There could be beautiful humans who are not beautiful externally and very ugly humans who are beautiful externally. So I thought, we're finally, breaking down that aspect where if you're good looking, you should be influential and you should be everybody's role model, because that's what it is now. People who are good looking just automatically rise up to the top of societal structures. But then I immediately noticed that that's not what they're doing. It's the same vanity, meaning it's the same exact focus on attraction. It's just now we're going to lie about it. So it's not, there's more important things about being beautiful. So yes, I may not be the most attractive human in the world, but here are my other qualities that can contribute to humanity the same way you could. It's now, no. I may not look attractive, but that's just because society's telling you that. I really am just as attractive as everybody else. And it's like, what are you gaining? If we're trying to do these society overhauls, what are we gaining by keeping the same ills around?
Right.
Like, even if we get convinced that fat is beautiful, so now skinny people in another 100 years are going to do a revolution, and then we're going to have skinny people back up on top. Why don't we lose the whole obsession with vanity? Okay, so you're not the most attractive human in the world. Make yourself presentable.
Well, I guess you can argue that body positivity is agreeing with you in terms of trying to make, the classic thinner, beautiful look not as important or not the ideal necessarily.
Looks not beautiful. They're trying to pretend that this is just as sexually attractive.
Right.
The focus should be is that's not your end goal as human. Okay, so you're not the most attractive human in the world. Who cares?
But I think people in this day and age don't want to accept that being fat is not ideal. It's like, it's deeper than just the looks. It's a health issue. It's a crazy concept. Now, listen, a fat person should still be loved and treated with respect. However, there's a very big detachment nowadays in the Western world between the underlying truth that even people who are delusional know in the back of their subconscious, and then what makes everyone feel comfortable. There's the truth, and then there's your truth. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of people prefer to live in their truth because it's nice and comfortable over there, Well,
there's no obligation to change.
Right. There's no accountability. And then they complain why things are so difficult. It's like, because at the end of the day, we all as humans have our underlying truths. Some people seem more dangerous than other people. We all have our confirmation biases. We all have, there's another terminology where we kind of naturally have our inclinations based on past experiences, right? So if we meet a person from a certain group, we're naturally going to have a certain feeling, right? So just to get blunt and straight to the point, so there's no sugarcoating. In America, Black people have this unfortunate stereotype, and it is due to some degree to their actions, is that when people see them in a dark alley, they automatically, their brain goes, oh, it might be dangerous, right? And people would say that's racist, but to a degree, that human being is trying to survive and say, okay, well, there might be more of a probability of that person hurting me, okay? And whoever's offended, think logically, it is what it is. Same way with Muslims, right? When you have somebody wearing hijab on a plane, a natural person's feeling is 9/11, person wearing a hijab, person's Muslim, hijacking, automatically, boom. Why? There could be a level of racism, and that's wrong, but there's also an idea where a human is looking at a past experience and saying, okay, well, if that happened before, there's a higher probability it may happen again. If you were in a relationship and you dated a woman that had certain personality traits and she cheated on you, and now you go and date a very similar woman, if you have, or rather, you don't necessarily start dating her, but you bump into her, or you meet her somewhere, and you notice that there's a lot of similarity between that girl that you're meeting now and the woman you dated, then you can infer that there's a possible likelihood, or there's a higher likelihood rather, that because this girl seems so similar, she might exhibit or inhibit or exhibit those similar traits. So in a sense, it's we do this to survive. So we have to be willing to call things out as they are, and we're going further and further away with this cancel culture. There has to be a line where we don't cross. For instance, racism should never be allowed to anybody. But if we can say things in a respectful manner, they should be able to be said. So that things get tricky in that regard. But, for instance, a lot of the time, very commonly, certain groups of Hasidic Jews are known to not be so well-mannered. We should be able to call that out and say it as it is. It's plenty of them are very sweet people. But at the end of the day, this is something that a lot of people notice to be the case, right? So instead of sugarcoating it and say, oh, well, it's their culture, they're from Eastern Europe, and they don't really put such an importance on please and thank you. Well, that's not an excuse, right? That's a pretty minor, in all grand scheme of things, they're not murdering anybody, but still, manners are very important, right? Like we have the saying, kindness comes before Torah. That's the best translation I got. But, so those are important things. Ultimately, it's important to call things out as they are, to do it in a respectful way, not intending to hurt the person, but we walk on eggshells so much that we do more harm than good by doing that. It's my feeling.
I think there is a reason there's like a strong correlation between a lack in religiosity. Like as America progresses, less and less people are religious or associated as believers.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this transition in society where things that we've held to be kind of objectively true. And it didn't have to be necessarily based on religion. It could have been based on anything. But things we held of as objectively true are now shifting into this, as you mentioned, subjective truth or your own truth. So I think those two are very linked, because if you don't have something which is objective, which means, and to be fully objective in like a social sense would have to be beyond humans. Because if it's deriving from humans, then it's not objective. It's by definition subjective. So it has to be something that derives from something beyond humans. So when you get rid of that, so then all the truths only do stem from humans. And that's the reality. It's not like we view it as weird because we're kind of coming from this almost religious perspective that there is an objective truth. And therefore, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm a woman, you're like, you're not. You might think that, or just to do it in a way that everybody, all your listeners will agree. If somebody comes to you and says, like, if I come to you and say, hey, I'm a black person, you're like, right. No, you're not. There's an objective reality, and you don't fit under that. But right. Objective realities are stemming from something higher than people, especially when we're talking about relations between people. So if I want you to relate to me in a certain way, because I relate to myself in that way, the only way you can come and say you're wrong, you can't relate to yourself in that way, is with that higher being. Now, with the lack of religiosity and with the move towards atheism, the move away from God and the move away from religion, all of these avenues start opening up. And I think we're going to see in more and more as time progresses that everything we viewed as objective reality, or everything we viewed as true, no matter what you believe, all of those things are going to fall away. So you already have gender falling away. I don't believe we're too far away from having even, mathematical realities, scientific realities. Anything that we viewed as objective are all going to fall away because we don't have that higher sense of objectivity. And therefore, everything is based on my sense. If I believe, and I can convince 90% of America to believe 2 + 2 = 5. So who's right? Does 2 + 2 not equal 5 if I can convince the majority of people to hold it? So it depends. If you hold that there is an objective reality, if you hold that there is something that's beyond human conception, so then no, it doesn't matter. I don't care if 100% of humans for all time believe something. It's not true. So as a religious person, that's what I believe. I believe God created the world with a system, and that system is objective, and it goes beyond what we believe. And even if I never learned the Torah, and even if I never learned that certain things were wrong and certain things were right, those things would be wrong and right no matter what I believed.
But I wouldn't say that that's objective, because I think by definition, religion is arguably very subjective, right? Because you have Islam, Judaism, Christianity, they all think they're true. Each person who's part of that religion thinks they're true. There are certain facts that are not absolutely proven. Talk about splitting the sea, all these other miracles, Muhammad ascending to heaven, all these other things. They can very arguably be your truth versus the truth. So because they're by definition faith.
Well, I think they could be. But there's a difference between me believing that. Well, let's just take let's take religion, for example. So I believe in Judaism. Let's say as a Christian, he believes in Christianity.
Mhm.
So one of us is correct, one of us is incorrect, right? I believe that I'm correct, but my belief that I'm correct is that I'm correct in such a way that it wouldn't matter if I believed it or not. I believe that Judaism is correct whether I believe in it or not. Even if tomorrow I stop believing in it, right now I will tell you that even if I stop believing in it tomorrow, it's still correct.
It's a very interesting thing
A
to say.
subjective truth, I would say, if I believe something, like let's say beauty is subjective. So if I consider you attractive, I wouldn't say even if tomorrow I stop considering you attractive, you're still attractive to me. That's not true. It's only while I believe you're attractive that you're attractive. So when I say religion is objectively true, I mean that my belief in Judaism goes beyond my own belief.
Well, I it sounds nice, but if you stop doing it, then you can kind of argue that if it was true, you would never stop. That's what I have a hard time with. It's like when a lot of people decide to stop keeping things. My feeling is it still has truth to it, but some people just don't want to do it. But if you know something is true, like if God showed up right now and started talking to us, I'm not particularly religious. I would start practicing probably completely. I mean,
do you think you'd be a perfect person if God showed up?
I don't know about perfect. I don't know what perfect means, but if God came right now and everyone saw him and he said, everyone needs to be Jewish, all the other religions are wrong, you must do A, B, C to Z, a massive part of the human population would start converting to Judaism and doing Jewish things.
That's definitely true.
So I think largely using religion as an example is very interesting because it's arguably very subjective. I think we see it as objective because we grew up a certain way. But for instance, if all three of us were born Muslim, the likelihood of us being Jewish would be very slim.
That's true.
One of us might have converted, but the likelihood's slim. The biggest reason we are Jewish is not necessarily because we have this powerful belief, although we convince ourselves that we do. I think it's more so that we were born into it, and therefore we look for the truth in it. So you have these rare occasions where people convert, and I had this Jewish girl that converted to Islam, and I had the Arab guy who converted to Judaism. They are just as certain that they are doing the right thing. The Arab guy is like 100% sure that Judaism's right? And when I listen to him, I'm more on his side because I'm Jewish, and I love being Jewish. When I hear the Arab girl talk about Islam, I try to enter into her reality a little, and I kind of see where she's coming from. Not that I want to be Muslim or I believe in it necessarily. I don't believe in it at all, but I see her love for it. I get it. Like I kind of get it. Of course, I don't actually get it, but the way she loves the prayer and the way their culture is, it's it turns her on. It attracts her. She didn't get that in Judaism. And I think that goes beyond the surface level of, well, that's wrong for her to leave the faith. It's more of that's what speaks to her. So would I like to have someone maybe bring her back to have her as part of the tribe? Yeah. On the other hand, quite frankly, I don't really care. Like if that's what makes her happy, if she feels that that's true for her and she's not trying to bother me or promote violence or anything, that would be the only issue. Is if she's like, Hamas is great, I love them, then we have an issue. But if she wants to be Muslim and wear hijab and whatever, if it makes her happy, honestly, bro, I just don't care that much.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing about 2 + 2 = 5. I'm saying we all believe 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
We grew up in a society where that was taught, but we don't believe it because we were brought up in that society. We believe it because it's objectively true. Now, we can all envision ourselves growing up in a society where 2 + 2 was taught to equal 5 from the youngest age. And that was something which we agreed with, whether we understood it or not. We agreed that was the reality. But we can say now that 2 + 2 = 4, and that's an objective reality, regardless of whether somebody grows up in a different society. There is something that we can agree on, that it is objective, regardless of what society grew up on. So I'm just saying that I believe that religion, and it's not just it's a belief based on rationale, but if there is a God who is giving over something, so then whatever that God is giving over is objectively true, and it doesn't matter what anybody else believes. So you're correct in the sense that a person's belief in Judaism might be akin to a person's belief in Christianity, or a person's belief in Islam, or a person's belief in atheism. That's true. But I have a mechanism where I can say that you are incorrect to not believe in Judaism, whereas an atheist does not have a mechanism to say you are incorrect to believe in anything.
Why do you think? What mechanism is that?
For the Jew,
Yeah.
so God is the mechanism. If I'm correct, which I believe I am, then everybody else is incorrect. No matter what they believe, no matter what anybody believes, they're incorrect.
Okay. Well, that's just your belief, though.
It's my belief that it doesn't matter what people believe. That's different than my belief does matter, does depend on what people believe. There are beliefs that I have which are dependent on belief. Right? So, for example, again, my belief that somebody is attractive is dependent on me believing that person's attractive.
Mhm.
Once I stop believing that, it becomes not true in regards to me. If I stop believing in God, it doesn't become not true. If it's true regardless of who believes it.
Let me see if I can give an example. So let's say we were watching a movie, right? I don't want to list any movies, but let's say I don't want to say what I watched, but let's say we're watching a movie and all three of us watched it, and then afterwards we're having this debate, and we had two debates. One of them was what was our favorite part of the movie, and the other debate was what happened during a particular scene in the movie. Okay. And we were debating it back and forth. Now, one of those two debates can be settled objectively. The other one cannot. So if I say in chapter 2 or scene 2 of the movie, John killed Sally. So we can go look at the movie and I can show you, well, look, guys, we had this argument. You guys were like, no, John didn't kill Sally. And I was like, no, trust me, he did. And we can look at the tape and I'm like, well, there he's killing Sally. And I would be objectively correct because we're talking about a fact. Did John kill Sally in the movie? And I've proven that that's true. Now, you may still have an opinion that you may still believe you're correct, but one of us is actually correct, meaning something actually occurred in the movie. But let's say we're discussing that I think that scene was the greatest scene in the movie. And you're like, no, the scene where they were sitting in the restaurant eating the French fries was the greatest scene. So we watched the whole movie again. There's no way for me to prove objectively that John killing Sally was the greatest scene because there is no objective measure called the greatest scene. It's by definition, a subjective experience. What hit you the greatest? So too the difference between atheism and religion. My claim is God gave the Torah. Now you're right. I may not have a way to prove it. I think I do, but I may not have a way to prove that. But if we rewinded the tape on history and hit the spot where I'm claiming God came and gave the Torah, it's verifiable. It's either happened or it didn't happen. That's an objective statement. But if I said there is no God, the world is created randomly, I think humans should act, I think humans shouldn't kill each other. No matter how many times we watch history, you'll never be able to prove or disprove that statement. Because what do you mean? This is just random, molecules coming together. Who said anybody should or shouldn't do anything? That's what we mean by it's subjective. There's no underlying reality we're pointing to. So when the atheist says this is right, this is wrong, he's not pointing to any underlying reality. He's basically saying, I like the scene with the French fries. When I say God gave us a Torah and told us he created the world and told us what's correct, I'm saying John killed Sally in scene 2. Now you might say, I need to see the evidence. That's fine. But at least we're talking about an objective, verifiable, theoretically verifiable event. That's what Mati means when he says religion.
Right. I also think it can be argued whether that's verifiable because you have the logic of 300,000 people were there and they sent it down generation to generation, but that can't necessarily be proven either. And I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but there's a lot of I'm not necessarily looking at we're not really debating necessarily. I'm kind of just playing devil's advocate. For me, just to kind of give my thought on this, because I don't want to go too far down the religious debate rabbit hole. And it's not a rabbit hole, it's a great discussion.
Rabbit holes are fascinating places.
You're right. No, I think for me personally, when it comes to religion, I think there are wonderful things about it. What I find interesting is, for the most part, at least nowadays, very religious Judaism, for the most part, is still very peaceful, while you have a lot of other groups in other religions that are very violent, which I find to be funny because, you look at the world, and especially Islam now. Islam as a group has reformed the least of the three religions. So you have extremist Islamic groups that are unbelievably violent. And then you have, ultra Orthodox Jews in New York who are the farthest thing from violent. you know, and that speaks volumes to me. Where you can
Just
have
try
the
to get in the last piece of kugel.
right? You can have the most violent. Yeah, the most violence they do is push each other for food. No, none of them are killing each other to spread a caliphate. The only thing they're spreading is their stomachs. So it's just that in and of itself. It's funny how like Judaism, as extreme as it can be for the most part, is usually very peaceful. Now, people who are anti-Israel maybe listen to this, go, what are you talking about? There's all this push of Zionism and all these extremist Jews in the West Bank, these settlers, right? And I still think that's an anomaly. It's a small group, but they're nowhere near what other extremist groups are like. So it doesn't necessarily validate Judaism, but to me, from a biased perspective, as much as I'm not necessarily so practicing day to day, I very much connect with it and love and appreciate it. And, that's just really the premise of it. I think religion has a lot of benefits in terms of the traditional values. I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a traditional Jewish household. It was around Jewish traditions where it's just a lot of healthy things. Shabbat, dinners, meals, being family oriented, having a strong opinion on modesty. My idea of modesty is going to be different from you guys. Like I would date a girl who wears pants. It's different, but there's still a line of modesty for me. So I'm always going to have those traditional values. They're never going to leave me. They're always going to be there, and I think they're very healthy. I think America probably needs a lot more of that. But I think also the things are going to turn themselves around. We're going to go so far off the deep end with extreme feminism and all of these views. It's eventually going to get to a point where it's going to weaken society so much that there's going to be a fight against it. And there already is a lot of push against it. But there's going to be such a rift and such a divide where something will have to give. And it might happen 30 years from now, but I think it'll happen a lot sooner. Things are going to become so challenging that things will start to revert back because it's the cycle of events in history, like we mentioned earlier.
God willing, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, for sure. But I like freedom. I like that America has freedom to choose. There has to be one thing that's super important is, and I think this has to become something sooner than later. Men need to be able to be men. They should be strong. They should pick up heavy things. They should work hard. They should make money. They should provide, protect. They should have facial hair and some hair on their chest.
I was going to add that, yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's okay, Matu, we forgive you. And women and
my
women
face identifies as a woman. I'm sorry.
I know. I see. You do have very soft very soft features, and just let your hair grow out a little bit. and women should be embracing their femininity. If they want to have jobs, go ahead. They can do whatever the hell they want. But I think a healthier society will be where men are men, where men are rugged, strong, tough men, and women are sweet and they're women. And if you can't understand that as a listener, then that's you, right? The people who understand me will understand me easily. People who don't, and be like, what do you mean? What does that mean? What do you gauge that? How do you do it? It's like, no, you either get it or you don't. That is all. Okay. So peoples, I really enjoyed having you guys on. It was a great discussion. Avi and Mati, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It was a
Thank you
pleasure
for having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was a good halachic discussion. We got pretty deep over here. It's a shame it wasn't Thursday, because if it was Thursday, we would call this like a Mishmar podcast.
Hey, we're open Thursdays,
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'd be happy to go on yours if you guys are open to it.
Oh yeah.
You guys are up for it. It'd be awesome. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, guys. So I look forward to Mati. I look forward to meeting you in person because I've met 3 out of the 4. And definitely, guys, make sure to check out the Jewish. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The Jewish Thought
Flow.
Jewish Thought Flow. I can't seem to get. Okay, the Jewish Thought Flow podcast. Make sure to check it out. Subscribe, like, share. What platforms are they on?
It's on all of them: Apple Podcast, Spotify.
Okay,
Jewish
so
podcasts.
I've already subscribed. Make sure to check them out, guys, and of course, subscribe to mine. Take a moment, take 2 seconds, subscribe, and hit the bell so you're notified of all podcasts. I know there are people who are watching my podcast and aren't subscribing. Understand that this is something I put a lot of work into, and it really, really means a lot if you can take the time and subscribe, leave some comments, and like the videos. Gentlemen, this has been the 100th episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
You didn't tell us that. That's amazing.
Yes, sir. 100 people. I never double booked a guest, man. I've always had new guests.
So we're 100 and 101.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be Yeah, that's nice. That's true. To an extent.
Obviously the 100th.
Well, I mean, it's really not true. You guys are the 100th podcast, but yeah, the guest wise, yes, 100 and 101. So yeah, guys, really, thank you. And it's a big milestone, man. You guys get to be my 100th episode. It's pretty awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I hit 1,000 subs recently. I got over 100,000 views last week, total views. So yeah, man, I'm really just, God willing, this is going to keep building and growing, and I'm really trying to turn this into something. So I appreciate the support, guys. Thank you for joining me.
A lot of success.
Man, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'll give you guys a ring after. Just schmooze a little bit after.
Okay.
Alrighty. All right, guys. Bye.